So we have an evening now with Dot Jessiman, who's a candidate standing on the list for the North East of Scotland for Alba. I'm obviously saying this to everybody who knows exactly who Dot is and exactly what Dot's doing, but I'll say it anyway. So without further ado, I think I'll turn this over to yourself, Dot, if you want to give us an overview or kick off the chat. Tell us about what you're preparing to do.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of you, but I think I'd like to start off with saying a bit more about myself. I mean, you know me about working with me, but I think it's quite important in these things to see where people are coming from. I'm an English Cockney from a working class background. My people were docks people in the East End of London. And I was the first of my family to get a grammar school education, which basically for people at that time was a passport to a whole new world. I was born just 7 years after the vote was given to women unconditionally, and a background which meant I know a great deal about gender inequality, and has made me a lifetime activist for feminism, but I hope one who believes in equal treatment, always recognizing the need to improve one's own position without threatening the rights of others. So if you've read the Alba Women's Charter, you'll know I've come home. I was a team leader and a programmer working for the Greater London Council, wriggling through a very complex system to try and deliver housing to the builders on time and under budget. And that left me with a knowledge of just how unfit the UK system is for purpose, and was part of what drove me into the indie movement, on the basis that if the Scots, lucky them, had a chance to get clear of the UK system, they should probably grab it with both hands and run. It's a privilege and one you should take. I married a Scot and I've lived in the Northeast for over 40 years now. And I have a son in New Zealand and 2 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren in Australia. Politically, I was a Labour Party activist in London and a trade unionist. And I spoke at the TUC on the Equal Pay Act. And I was therefore, of course, part of that enormous push for social reform led by Roy Jenkins, which led to items like equal pay and adoption of equalities and the decriminalisation of homosexuality. My husband was able to come back to Scotland on the back of the oil, and I joined the Banff and Buchan SNP in 1988, when I came finally to accept that the things I valued about Scotland would probably only be maintained in an independent Scotland. Alec was my MP, and any of you who know him will know that if he sees a job in you, he's going to make sure you do it. I was a founder member of New Scots and a convener of it at the time when they succeeded in establishing that nationalism and racism aren't the same thing. I was appointed to the Land Commission, the Scottish Land Commission that Alex set up, and wrote its report, which became the baseline for the SNP's policy on land reform. I worked for the Whip's office voluntarily in those days, helping Rosanna, who was dealing with the Scotland Act in the House of Commons, which gave me a very clear idea of the lacks which are built into the devolution process. A good read of Schedule 5 of the clause which covers retained powers is, I think, almost a must for anyone who wants to develop an argument for Scottish independence. Locally, I've concentrated on my Talk Independence feature on the store, um, which tours for the summer shows. And this was a bottoms up exercise, the material of which was based on the questions that came to us from the voters. And of course, I've worked with a lot of people in this group on the question of stalls and meeting the public. Until February, I was a member of the NEC, the governing body of the Scottish National Party. I think that's enough about me, but I wanted to give some idea of where I'm coming from as a candidate and why my experiences and my priorities have found me standing for a brand new party, Alba. I joined Alba because after talking to Alec, I knew that he held a view I shared, that independence had to be the main priority of any Scottish government. Partly because, never mind the polls, all the public contact I have had in the past 3 years showed that the shambles the UK government has made of both Brexit and the pandemic was bringing the Scottish public to accept what we've been telling them for years. Well, you know the analogy between party organisations and a brewery, and I think that's about sums it up. The second thing was that in 20 years of devolution, Scottish governments have, I think, taken devolution and Scotland about as far as they could without further powers. They are beginning, I think we are beginning to run out of steam as to the essential things that we need to do and we can't. And further, that not only were those further powers unlikely to be granted, but the UK government has enshrined in law measures that would enable them to override the Scottish government in areas as important as conservation, food protection, which covers both public hygiene and many of our major industries where the export of our food products has a reputation for purity and abroad, which has been hard won and is liable to be overridden. And finally, and certainly not the least important, the protection of free medical care at the point of delivery, the so-called power grab. So that without independence, we could not go forward and would be dragged backwards, unable to do anything except wring our hands. Before I go on to sort of talk a bit more about independence and the way Alba looks at it, I'd like to touch on quickly just on the subject of lists. I know I'm talking to most say for the converted, but I think it's worth saying in discussing the party, I'm quite sure that Fergus is going to take back Aberdeenshire West. And I find it very hard to believe that the leadership of the SNP is prepared to see its eye-wateringly superior number of votes divided to reduce it to less than those cast from the unionist parties on the off chance that one of its constituency seats would be lost. Would be lost. I'm not going to go argue on about it. I think we all know the thing, but I think that if they do it, it will say more about the priorities of present day SNP than anything I can say, and indicate quite clearly why I joined Alba. All the independence parties have, with the exception of women's rights, many policies, priority policies in common. Though obviously they've got variations and differences of methods. But economic recovery, some sort of Green Deal, tackling poverty, which is, to my mind, the biggest and the most unjust inequality of all. And inward investment, both in individual businesses and in the infrastructure projects that bring jobs. And of all, of course, independence. But only Alba is prepared to be honest with the public and admit that none of these things have a hope of happening without the powers of an independent nation state. If you examine those policy aims, you can't engineer a full economic recovery without full economic powers. You can't negotiate a Green Deal if you haven't got financial powers. You can't tackle crying needs of poverty without welfare powers, and you cannot invest substantially without taxation powers to allow you to raise the necessary cash. Not only do we not have those powers under devolution, but as I have already said, we're likely to lose some of those we have and prolong the sort of bits and pieces approach of the Smith Commission, which is so hostile to efficient government. For example, personal taxation to the Scottish government, financial allowances to UK, and dividing up welfare amongst, with various bits of pieces allocated either side in a border in a way that is, to my mind, guaranteed to mean that people in desperate need are going to fall between two stools. So we don't feel that any Scottish government has any sort of choice. If they want to do the things they say they need to do, they must concentrate on Indy first and feed all the policies into it. And in other words, now, and we need a supermajority to do it. So the subject of powers and the tactic of supermajority, I think, is something that needs discussion. There's been a lot of sarcastic hot air wasted on the concept. And let's face it, Alba knows perfectly well that the initiative of any action towards independence will have to rest with the SNP, either as a minority or a majority government. And how far they are prepared to discuss and adopt or adapt some of our ideas to carry independence forward. And I think they're going to be judged on how they respond, not only by the Yes movement as a whole, but on their own grassroots members. It's also true that a UK government, which is hardly a supporter of moral obligation or democratic principles, will not see a supermajority as dictating an offer for Section 30. But I think what it might well do is see them putting forward a concession or two to shut us up, which is something very consistent with their past behavior. And I think that this is something we should think about and we should use. My preference would be to make it a condition to tackle the Sewell clause and changing that they would normally override a Scottish Parliament to the fact that they may not override a Scottish Parliament, which would save us a lot of trouble in a lot of different directions. So I don't think we should knock supermajority or allow anybody else to do it. We should use it for Scotland's benefit. And then I think the other word that's attracted adverse criticism is the word now. Well, of course, when we say now, we don't mean have a referendum tomorrow. We mean make a start now, kickstart all the things that will have to be done before we can negotiate with any hope of taking a decent deal out of it. You can't do these things overnight, but you can make a start. And we've thought it through. Immediately, you give the shot across the bows to make it clear you expect to use your majority to negotiate. Now, that quite possibly will be turned down. But if they do turn it down, I think it will be an indication of intransigence in the face of a democratic decision, and that could be useful to a Scotland government should it face any challenges in court. We want to set up a cross-party commission to thrash out the legal and the political strategy to feed into negotiations and to oversee the setting up of commissions on written constitution, on the currency, on pensions, just to mention a few, to prepare for a post-independent Scotland. And I should point out that the two latter subjects are really quite important, because among the top priorities of the public to the last 15 years, to my personal knowledge, have been the subjects, the things that people have worries about are pensions and currency. So these things matter. And to the SNP government, I would say that if you feel the need to get on with the day job, if you are concerned that you can only tackle one thing at a time, then what all good management does, you delegate. And we've suggested how they can do it, and we're suggesting that they get on with it straight away, because I think, as I've made clear, Indy just simply has to come first. That's really all I've got to say.
No, that was excellent, Dot. Thank you for that. I think you were very clear and very articulate on that. We've got some questions that have come in, but I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and just fire in with my own question just now. And I know we're going to find out soon enough what the makeup of the new Parliament's going to look like on Thursday. And you mentioned they're getting cross-party consent or cross-party involvement, looking at some of the challenges we're going to face. We know that the Tories are never going to shift budge an inch on this, but if the Lib Dems and Labour have as another incredibly poor showing, do you think that there's a possibility that they might be warmer to independence, or at least getting involved in the conversation? Because essentially, I don't know how many times Labour have hit rock bottom, but it looks like they're going to find another level below where they are at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I certainly think that Labour might. I mean, I have always found it very difficult to understand that Labour do not realise that they have come very badly out of their unionist stand. And I think that I have a feeling that Sawa has quite a clear idea on this. I think they might. On the other hand, it might be possible perhaps to not confine it entirely to MPs and MSPs. I mean, we did also say MSPs, perhaps some of the Labour Party. Well, they haven't got any. I mean, this is the difficulty, isn't it? But it's possible, I think, that we might go outside and bring in people of standing from the wider community, if that took the discussions forward, because I think it would be a pity if we confined them entirely just to the two parties. Yeah. But I think it's going to be something we're going to very much have to play by ear.
Yeah. Okay. One of the questions that came in, I don't know who this is from, and I guess just looking at some of these, they were probably aimed more from, this was meant to be a hustings. So, in an independent Scotland, what line of foreign policy will the new Scotland take based on your party's views?
I would think that, for a start, one of the things that we would like would be a good relationship with Europe. Now, what form that would take, I think, is something that will evolve over time. As you know, we're rather inclined to feel that we should, in the first instance, approach the sort of smaller Scandinavian group, really because we feel we've got to make some progress quickly, and this is going to take 6 months. people talk as though the EU is something you're just going to be able to rejoin. And they're basing that on the fact that it's undoubtedly the EU has made welcoming noises. But I think that what they underestimate, and I'm afraid I think that I include the SNP government in this, is the fact that, okay, they want to welcome us, but they're a very hard-nosed lot. They've got to bear in mind the whole time that they've got to hold 27 other people together, other governments together, and negotiations are going to be tough. They're not going to just let us in. They're going to drive a hard bargain. And I think you don't need a crystal ball to be quite clear that one of the things likely to involve is fishing, which means that we are going to have to take a really quite a tough position and make sure, because while into the UK, it's 2.5% of the economy as opposed to 70% plus. For us, it's very much important. And also, I think as politicians, we have to bear in mind the degree of support we have amongst the fishing community, and we can't afford to betray that. So I think that's part of it. Whether we go into Europe, on what terms we go into Europe, I think is something that's going to have to develop over time. I personally would like to see us go into Europe. Partly, I suppose it's a generational thing with me. We haven't had a war since then, and before 1945, I think you will find that at some stage in the last 100 years, although almost every member of Europe had actually been at war with somebody else at some stage. And I think that's the basic thing that gives me my support. But it's going to have to be negotiated. It's going to have to be tough. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that Alba feels that we should set up commissions to sort of start sorting out what sort of independent Scotland we want, so that we're in a position to stand up for it when we come into negotiation. So I can't be more positive than that. I'd be telling fibs if I did.
Thank you for that. I'm going to throw a very easy one for you now. Again, bearing in mind this was thought about when there were two other parties going to be attending. How would you define the noun woman?
How would I define? Oh, that's very straightforward, simple. I go with science. For me, a woman is an adult female, and that's it.
Yeah. Are there any objections from anybody on the call for that? I suspect not.
Have a discussion, really quite extraordinary. And I mean, the next thing I suspect we're going to hear is that people have joined the Flat Earth Society. I mean,
it's one of the observations I made some time ago. If you were to go back 25 years and try and explain the internet to somebody and say that everybody's mobile phone, their computers are all going to be interconnected, and we're going to have this amazing thing, that's going to join everybody together, and we'll have social media, but you will spend your time arguing about what the definition of a woman is. What would be the hardest to believe, the technology or the complete, moving away from or unmooring from reality?
And furthermore, I think that sooner or later, there is going to be a massive reaction from the public, because over whom this whole argument, it's flowing quite over their heads, because they know perfectly well what they think. And they are not going to take very kindly, I think, to the fact when they find that people are sneaking things through the back door, which undermine their own sense of security, I suppose.
Okay. Touching on the currency, will your party be willing to fully discuss and debate currency options for a new Scotland, including gold, silver, or a Bitcoin standard? I guess you've partly answered that already, but I suppose the introduction of a Bitcoin standard is an interesting one. I know it has been mentioned before.
I have to admit that I am not technically competent to answer. And I'm not going to make a fool of myself by trying to. But I do think The only thing I would say about currency was some years ago, because it was something that kept coming up on the stall, I researched the question of I took three options, a Scottish, sterling and the euro, and researched what the various options were. I consulted, as I always do, I go back to sort of roots as far as I can. And I consulted a whole series of experts, and it'll come as no surprise to anybody to know that they all said something different. But the one thing that they were agreed upon was that an independent Scottish currency would, an independent Scottish currency would enable a Scottish government to control the economy well. And I think that says it on its own. That's where we should aim for. I think it would be foolish, again, to think that given our present state of preparation, we're in a position to do anything about it quickly. I think that the Andrew Wilson went too far to the other extreme with saying 7 years. I think we certainly should be able to look at the possibility of a Scottish currency. But I think one of the other things that I always feel a bit doubtful about when we're talking about currency is that what we do about currency, once we've got our Scottish pound, which we would need if ever we wanted to go into the euro, you have to have your own currency first. I think is that it would be the sort of decision that would have to be taken at the time, because currency situation changes. I mean, how many people would think that sterling would be in the position it is now, say if you went back so many years? I think it changes, and what a Scottish government at the moment will have to do is to take a decision which is in the interests of Scotland at that particular time. And
okay, thank you for that. Again, this is aimed at a multi-party question, so I'll ask it as it's been written. So, are any of you warm, welcoming, tolerant, and inclusive, or do you have limits where you are willing to voluntarily exclude and/or not allow the right to speak of anyone you disagree with? I guess in that there's probably two parts to that. I'm reading that as a freedom of speech issue, and I guess immigration is in there, warm, welcoming, and tolerant and inclusive. So,
well, I mean, let's take immigration first. Scotland needs immigration. I mean, in certain areas, even more than others. Though hopefully, in an independent Scotland, we could, in fact, put our economy together in a way which would enable us to direct help into the various regions of Scotland according to their needs. But immigration, particularly in the Highland areas, they have an age problem, and although in the long term one would hope that we would be able to build economies so that young people wanted to stay, in the short term we need immigrants. And I don't think what I've seen, I can't see any sign that having immigrants from Pakistan, there's a strong Pakistan community, there's a strong Polish community, and they seem to do nothing but good. They feed into the general well-being of Scotland. I think it keeps your culture flexible too. You meet people from other parts of the world, and you come to some sort of arrangement between you. As far as disagreeing with people in an argument, I have no problem with that at all. I enjoy arguing.
I think that probably goes for most people. Certainly that I know on this Zoom meeting. So I guess that's maybe a reference to the hate crime bill, and there seems to be a contraction in what is what is hate speech. It seems to be just something that somebody finds offensive. I think the term is too loose and too open to abuse.
I think it's very worrying, because I cannot see why you need to stuff labels on people, which it seems to me is what you're doing. In fact, I loathe the whole idea of discriminatory groups. This sort of idea of groupism, that you get labeled with, like, you're a woman, you're a man, you're a Protestant, you're a Catholic, you're black, you're white, all these things. You're gay, or you're it just seems to me that it's an irrelevance. It's what kind of person you are. It's your label. And I worry about labels, and I worry about this branding of people as having a set. Because you disagree with them on one issue, you sort of give them a set of other characteristics at the same time. And I think the worry is that if you allow labels to take over, if you allow to say, well, as we've had here, to be called homophobic because you disagree with a gay person, then you're heading in a very dodgy direction indeed. And the trouble is, you stuff a label on person, you stop seeing them as a person, you stop seeing them as a human being, and you just see the label. And I think that is extremely dangerous and should be fought with everything we've got.
Thank you. A question in from some, I guess this is in light of the news that, and I can never pronounce the name, Murdool is now CEO of Edinburgh Rape Crisis. Would Alba consider the creation of a separate system different from what we have now to support women that are victims of sexual violence?
I don't know. It's not something on which I would want to give an off-the-cuff opinion. I think with all these things, one of the things that upsets me very much is the degree to which the soundbite mentality is beginning to be applied to subjects which are complex, which are extremely sensitive, and which really need very careful consideration. I hope that what Alba would do with any of these situations is proceed from the kind of attitude which is summed up, for example, in our Women's Charter, to examine, to consult with the community, and to see if one can find ways through of dealing with this kind of thing. Obviously, at the moment, one of the things that is very much at the top of the thing is the question of women's space in women who have been subject to domestic abuse and then being faced with male staff, male nurses. They can call themselves what they like. It may even be that in rational discussion, you can accept that they are women. But let's face it, women who've been subject to rape, women who've been subject to abuse are not liable to feel rational about having a man around them. And I think in those circumstances, common humanity demands that their views would prevail.
Okay. I notice Craig Dempsey has got his hand up for a question. Craig, do you want to unmute and ask Dot?
Yeah, thanks. Good evening. It's not actually so much a question. I'm based in mid-Scotland in Fife, and a couple of weeks ago, Eva Crombie, who's Alba Party's #1 list candidate, asked me to provide her with some statistics and some figures on voting patterns for the region. And I found them interesting. There was a few wee different things came out. So I've now done it for all the regions. So what I want to do is pass on a couple of figures for the North East of Scotland region. Obviously, some of them are going to know well, but it might surprise you with one or two of them. The 10 constituencies at the moment, 9 are SNP, 1 Tory. I agree with totally what Dot said. I think furthest much will take Aberdeen West. Looking at the voting patterns from the general election. So that's going to give the whole region, constituency-wise, will be SNP, which dilutes the SNP vote even more than it did in 2016. 2016, 137,086 votes went to the SNP for nothing, not a thing. We get a lot of stick saying, if everybody who voted SNP had voted on the list, would have got seats and all the rest of it. The SNP vote nationally on the list only fell by 2.3%. Strangely, in the northeast of Scotland, it actually fell by 8.1%, which is a lot. It's the highest fall. The majority of that went to the Greens, no doubt about that. But when you add that 8.1% back on to the SNP list vote in 2016, it makes no difference. We still would not have got a list seat. So they were all wasted votes. So what does Alba have to do to actually pick up a seat? Fortunately for you guys, you've got the boss up there, Alex Salmons. Now he will carry a personal vote. If we use the 2016 figures, Alba Party will need 18,445 votes to get 1 list seat. To get 2 list seats, it will require 38,792. These figures, when you consider that 137,000 people gave up SNP their second vote, those figures are not impossible. They are very, very possible. And I know what's happening in the polls on national papers. I study the data tables, and I can't argue with them. But are they asking the right questions? Are they asking the right people? Because what I'm seeing on the doors through the Kirkcaldy hub is there's a hell of a lot more support for Alba out there than what is shown in these polls, an awful lot more. And I honestly believe, having looked at all 8 regions, that Alba can elect a minimum of 2 MSPs per region. Now, for a party which is less than 2 months old, to be able to elect 1 MSP is incredible. You know, I was a candidate for AFE in the Mid-Scotland and Fife, and we had Martin Keatings as our #1 candidate, and we were struggling to get him elected, I believe. So for a party like Alba to come on board and be able to get 1 is amazing. But I genuinely believe, looking at voting patterns, looking at the SNP votes that were wasted, I think in 7 of the 8 regions, they will take 2 seats, and that includes the south of Scotland. I think the one area where it may be a little dodgy for them is Highlands and Islands. I think the SNP vote there may stay because they're likely to get a list seat if their vote holds up because of Orkney and Shetland voting Lib Dem. So really, just to sum up, we can actually do this. But for independence, we need to do this. And my biggest fear is turnout. We need to get our vote out because believe me, the Tories, they'll be out in force. They always are. We need to get our vote out there on Thursday, into the polling stations, putting the cross where it should be. It's doable. It is very, very doable. So
Well,
we need
Craig,
to go for it, people.
Craig, just a couple of stories because obviously we've been cut out by the BBC, the news, the papers, the other parties. Alba, you cannot mention it. Leafleting, obviously we can't speak to folk like we could, but 2 examples I've had, somebody came running out the door after me and I thought, oh, here we go. An angry voter, but he was waving the Alba leaflet and he said, oh, thank you so much. I joined, I'm a member, this is great. So that was thumbs up. Another one today, you know, you got the top of the Maltese and you come down the stairs to get to the next floor, and those stairs in the multis, shall we say, you can find some characters who probably got challenging lives, and I came across two guys, I thought, oh, should I go back? But actually we started chatting, they says, what are you doing? I says, and they went, oh, Alba. I goes, have you heard of it? Aye. And I says, and he goes, I'm voting. I says, are you registered to vote? Thought it was a bit late now. Oh, he says, it's Alex, we need Alex back. So it's maybe cutting through more than we know.
Yeah.
Listen, I undoubtedly believe it.
I think one of the things is, I'm going now, not so much on what's happened since we set up the party, but on the situation that I found as a member of the NEC, representing the grassroots of the NEC of the SNP on the NEC. And because the pandemic, I was able, through using Zoom, to attend a lot of branch and constituency meetings all over the Northeast to talk to people about the situation on the NEC and to deal with the concerns of members about various SNP policies. And I got the feeling very strongly that before Alba ever came along, the members of the SNP were considering that second vote very carefully indeed. It's been annoying them for a long time that they were giving that sort of majority to the SNP, and all they got was Juckett and Ross and all the rest of it. And it's been irritating them. And I think they were considering what to do. I know that there were quite a lot of people who were considering the second vote and giving it to another party, but they were just not impressed by the idea of dividing it against three really very sort of Pili-Wally groups, if I could use that expression. And so when Alba came along, I think it met two needs. One was that it did offer a party that was led by somebody who is a great strategist, whom nobody could challenge his dedication to independence. Somebody who frankly knows what he's doing. And that was one thing. So they suddenly had that. And I think the other thing was that they had been frustrated for the 4 or 5 years, unable to even to discuss independence. Gradually the knowledge growing on them that Section 30, the easy way through, wasn't going to be available, and becoming more and more and more frustrated. And I think when Alba came along, it was a bit like a dam, it was like a dam bursting. And I think that there are, in fact, I'm sure that there are a lot of SNP people who are carrying out, I think that the Northeast car canny is engraved on your hearts. And I think they're just keeping their mouths shut. And there will be quite a few who will come over. Alex says that if 50% of them did it, we'd have an earthquake. Whether that would happen or not, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see on Thursday. It's of some considerable importance to me, because I'm tail end Charlie at number 4. So, but I think that the feeling is there. I think that I don't trust polls. I've got no time for polls at all. I found this campaign difficult because I haven't been able to do what I normally do and rely on my nose when I'm on the street. Stuart Pratt, who's Alex's agent, always says you can taste a win. And I think you can, and you can taste the reverse. If you're out amongst people, you get a feel. And the other thing that sounds good about it is the sort of thing that Teresa was just saying. What's coming back I was at a meeting, I was at a women's meeting in Edinburgh on Sunday, when there were a whole lot of us for the first time actually got together in the flesh. And what was coming in from all over, with two exceptions, was the fact that they couldn't correlate the feeling that they were getting on the streets as they delivered leaflets with the results of the polls. And I think, I mean, I don't trust polls anyway. I think they're manipulative rather than informative. And so I just think that we may get a surprise. And certainly, I think for even with what the polls have grudgingly allowed us, for a party as young as we are, with no organization and all the rest of it, I think we've done pretty well so far. And I think we may surprise a few people yet.
Lee, I think, wanted to come in.
Can I come in for Lynn on behalf of Lynn Miller? She's got a question in the chat. She was there early on. So she says, lovely to be here this evening and listen to you, Dot. The question is, do you think if Alba do well this week, that other SNP elected members will join Alba?
Do I think other people? I know personally of a couple of people who are waiting for their SNP membership to run out. I think whether that happens, if say we get a reasonable number through, say we get, I don't know, say 1, 2 from each region, 10, 12, 14, that sort of figure, which I think is definitely within reach. We may well get more, but even at that level, I think a lot is going to depend on what Nicola does. I think if she persists in the kind of attitude she has been displaying in public recently, and in particular, asking her newly elected SNP MSPs to stand up and vote against independence, I think it will have an appalling effect on their membership figures, and possibly even on their on the MSPs themselves. I think to force them into that position is unbelievably stupid. But as things go, it looks as though she's intending to do it. Whether they can stop her before she gets there, whether wiser counsels will prevail when push comes to shove, we don't know. But I think if she does it, the answer is yes, we will.
Lee, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, following on briefly from Dot's comments about whether you can feel the way the electorate is swinging, I think that's probably right. I remember campaigning in the 2017 election, the UK election for the SNP, and the feeling we were getting on the doorsteps was rather negative. I thought we ran perhaps quite a poor campaign in a number of ways. The campaign was one in which we hadn't really prepared for, and the feedback we got wasn't great. And I definitely got the feeling in that campaign that we were going to do not as well as we had hoped, and that turned out to be true. Now, the campaign we're running here, where allegedly we're only on 2-3%, is not reflected in what I'm finding on the ground. What I'm finding on the ground is that, ironically, for a party that's only a month old, we've probably had the best ground campaign of all the parties. We've had people going out to, in fact, I've been overwhelmed with the amount of people wanting to leaflet, to publicly show their support in terms of displaying banners, in terms of talking about us, in terms of, discussing us publicly. And I think that's incredibly telling. And that, to me, does not equate to 2 or 3%. That equates to 10%, if not more. So the feeling I get from the campaign is basically that we are further ahead in the polls than they indicate. Now, if anybody was watching Alec on the BBC before we came on. What he said, I think, was quite telling, in that back in 2014, or 2012, in fact, when we started the independence campaign, we were sitting at about 30% in the polls, support for independence. So there was probably a degree of the politicians being ahead of the people. But now that we're about 50%, if not more, in the polls, the people are probably ahead of the politicians. And I don't think the people will forgive the SNP or the independence movement more generally if we don't progress this cause when we have the opportunity to do so. The one thing I'd finally add is that the one concern I have, or I would have had in this campaign regarding the SNP, was perhaps complacency, that they've been in power now for 14 years. And at that point in time, when you're ahead in the polls, it's easy to take votes for granted. And a number of people I know, because I've spoken to them, have said that they may have perhaps struggled to go out to vote otherwise. But because Alba came on the scene and we had this message of you need to vote for the SNP in your constituency and vote Alba on the regional list, that gave them the incentive to go out to vote. So rather than hindering the SNP, I think we could be complementing and supporting the SNP, as well as, in fact, returning the maximum number of independent supporting MSPs.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, because I'm thinking back also to the last election, and people always we lost Alex's seat in the constituency I was fighting. We lost Alex's seat not because we were faced with tactical voting, which we were, but we knew we had enough support that we reckoned we could win by about 2,500 votes. Somewhat humiliating descent from sort of 19,000, but nevertheless, we thought we were there. What fixed it wasn't the tactical voting. What made the difference between losing and winning that seat was the fact that our own party was, both members and supporters would not turn out either to work and finally to vote. There was support that we should have had voting that didn't do it. And to my mind, it is always because when the SNP backs off on independence, people start to lose enthusiasm. And I agree with, I agree. We put independence back on the agenda, which it wasn't. I mean, Nicola's been going around the place saying this isn't about independence. And in fact, the letter I had from my own MSP had 3 major things she was going to do. And down at the bottom was a little bit about some vague steps they were going to take about independence when they got round to it. Now, I think we've done something about that. My own worry about that is that there are a lot of people who in the SNP who are considering about their first vote. That from our point of view and what we want to achieve is just as worrying. And I'm not surprised. I feel like that myself. I'm voting, normally speaking, if I am going to be absolutely honest about this, normally speaking, I would not consider voting for a party that has, as a government, has concealed information from a person they were putting on a stand, from the courts, from the police, from their own legal term, and from a parliamentary committee. I wouldn't touch somebody like that. But they've got me over a barrel because, as far as I'm concerned, they are the only people who can bring about independence, and independence is the only way you can solve everything else. And I think there are a lot of people feeling like that in the SNP. They don't approve of the way the party's leadership has been behaving. And I think that what we've done is give them a reason to vote.
I think Serena is itching to come in.
Yeah, I totally. Thank you. Hi, Dot. I know you've only been going for a few weeks, and I'm sure that you guys are under a lot of pressure. So this is kind of looking a little bit to the future. I know Alex saying that working on the independence negotiations week 1, but are you guys going to be preparing some type of white paper? And I'm thinking in particular about the topics which the SNP have continually been beaten up about, such as, well, currency, for example. So I'm not expecting you to say that you've got something, but has that been discussed, and is that in the offing?
Well, what we have said about this, bear in mind that at the moment, we are a small party, that our manifesto has been put together by the candidates. We went for expert opinion, we had papers put in front of us, and we thrashed out our manifesto amongst the basically the candidates mainly. So that's where we are at the moment, and I believe that Alec is intending to call a conference later this year where we can start discussing these things against the wider membership in the way that we realize we have to. What we have said about currency, what we have said about all the things that we feel, is that we want to see a commission for Scotland set up, which will devise a legal and a political strategy for independence in support of the government as it goes into negotiations. I think, and that we would expect them to set up separate commissions to report back to the government, including, we would hope, citizens' assemblies, to begin to put together from the people of Scotland the kind of Scotland they would want to see. And things like currency is one of the subjects that we have indicated. Pensions is another. I think also the question of a central bank, and I expect others will come forward. But the thing that we don't want to do is to take up just take up a stand on it for the sake of saying something. We want to go into it. We want to go into it in detail. We want to make sure that it will work, because we feel that not only will that give us a way of indicating the kind of Scotland we want. I mean, independence isn't something on its own. It's what you can do with it. And I think we've got to put together that sort of picture of what an independent Scotland could do. And we've got at the same time to give ourselves a good, strong, solid base on which to negotiate. Because until you've got to make a start on this thing now, because you've got to give yourself a base on which you can negotiate. Until you have decided what your priorities are and roughly what sort of shape they're going to take, you're not going to be able to go and argue with somebody else. So these things, what we're saying is, no, we don't know the answers yet, but yes, we do think we've got to go ahead and start in on it. It's exactly the same way that I feel, for example, about the process of getting some sort of referendum. There are many alternative ways to Section 30. It just simply is not true that there aren't others. What we don't know, including about Section 30, is that there is simply no solid legal precedent for any single way of doing it. And to my mind, that means that the very first thing you have to do is you bloody well have to go and find out. I mean, you don't just sit there saying, nobody knows. You go and find legal opinion and you go and find out. And I think it's exactly the same question with the currency, or indeed anything else. At this moment in time, there isn't a body of opinion upon it. The only thing we've got on currency is Andrew Wilson. And I think that probably most people feel is a bit too far off, so to speak, that we should be able to come to a conclusion rather faster than, say, 7 years. So it's all up for grabs, really. We haven't got an answer. We think that it would be wrong to have a complete and nice tidy parcel at this stage in time. It's got to be thrashed out. What we are saying is you've got to start now. You can't mess about any longer. I think it's a criticism. One of the criticisms I have is that nothing was done to start setting these things together 3 years ago, when the intentions of the United Kingdom Parliament to mess with our Parliament became absolutely clear and incorporated, in fact, in legislation. So they were real. And I think we should have started that process then. But having lost that 3 years, we should start it now.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to come back to Lynn Miller. Lynn, I think it's more of a kind of statement rather than a question, but do you want to put the mic on and tell us what you've just typed? Putting you on the spot there. Is Lynn there?
No, sorry, I'm here. Do you know, I'm actually on my phone, and I've no idea. I normally do Zoom through my laptop, so I've actually no idea what I'm doing. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Yeah. So wait till I see how I get back into the chat then, to see what I actually put. Chat. Okay. So was it the SNP not delivering under F2? Was it that comment?
That was the comment. Yeah. I wonder if you want just to kind of...
So my comment was just that my feeling is that I don't think the SNP will deliver under F2 in their next tenure, but my feeling is that over the next 5 years, regardless of what Alba's result is this week, that we need to build them up to stand in the constituencies in 2026. I know it seems a bit dismal we're saying that, but this is just obviously my opinion. But we also need another strong indie party who will stand in the regions in 2026 and work together with Alba. That was my comment.
Well, it's nothing like looking ahead, I suppose, but it's difficult to say. I think an awful lot is going to depend on what happens within the NEC, within the SNP. Will the membership, who are very much in favor of moving forward on independence, will they be able to put pressure on the leadership and galvanize them into taking much more positive action towards independence? Will the SNP cooperate with us? But as far as what our plans are for the future, whether we would want to extend the way we stand or anything like that, I'll be quite honest with you, I really haven't thought it through. I've been in the 6 weeks since we started. I don't think my feet have touched the ground very long. And I think that's true of all of us. And I honestly don't think that we have got to that stage yet. We are too busy trying to just establish the position in the first place. So you'll just have to forgive us if we really can't put a crystal ball to this and give you a proper answer at the moment. I really just can't do it. I think perhaps this sort of thing is going to come out of the conferences that we have later.
I think as a personal view is that I think what Alba has done in the few weeks that we've been in existence is just breathed life and energy and optimism back into what would have been an awful lot of very frustrated people that were in the SNP. I left the SNP a few months ago before I even realized, knew Alba was going to come on the scene. So, for about 8 weeks, I was politically homeless. And I think about 3 minutes into Alex's launch speech, I was already on the website signing up. And I guess that's probably the case for quite a lot of us on this call. And quite a few that I'm not naming any names that will probably be doing the same thing shortly.
Yeah.
You know who you are.
I think one of the things that makes me roar laugh is when I read comments about Alec being a tired old man. And I bet Lee will back me up and say there are times when he wished to God he was.
Well, I was campaigning with him in Cove the other night, and he's anything if not tired.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex on campaign is unbelievable. I mean, he really is. He sort of drifts into somewhere. I've seen him sort of go and drift over and sit, pull his trouser leg up, cock his leg, sit on the wall. And the next minute you run, he's got about 20 people around him. And it's an amazing experience. And I mean, it can be very funny. I think some of you have heard me tell the story of when he was First Minister during the 2014, we were out campaigning in Tariff and we lost him. And his police driver was going potty. He's going really mad. We lost him for nearly an hour. And we finally caught up with him. And he had knocked on the door where they were holding a barbecue. And when we caught up with him, he was wandering around the lawn with a sausage in one hand, a glass of wine in the other, the life and soul of the party. And I mean, he just does things like this. He is incredible when he's campaigning, and he is inspiring to a degree. There's no question about that. It's exhilarating to work with Alec. It's the tremendous thing.
Anne-Marie Doherty has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Lynn. I think there's actually, there'll be a surprising amount of people who have thought about this, and if Dot says you would think we had enough to worry about, but I know quite a few people who have thought about this, and I think the SNP maybe don't realise that they are on the sugary peg. There's a lot of people thinking, well, this is an important election with, Brexit and all the rest of it, and they'll have to do it this time, surely. All the talk about democracy and what happens if they get the majority, and democratic. There's a lot of people, I think, one more time, and if nothing is moving by 2026, I think it will collapse. And Lynn's right, Alba needs to be ready to move in there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your summing up of the situation. What I can't do is give you any sort of indication of the way we are thinking about it. We certainly can't do it until such time. I mean, as far as the SNP is concerned, as I say, I'm giving them, I feel like that myself. I'll do it this once because they've got me over a barrel and I want to see movement on independence, and I need them to even have a hope of doing it. But if they don't do it, if this is just one more time when they ask for a mandate on the basis that they will do it, I mean, I'm even concerned about the fact that the method, to my mind, the method that they propose to do it is not going to be a successful way of acquiring a referendum. I don't think there's any question about that. And I am not satisfied that at this moment in time, that they will take advantage, if we did get our supermajority, that they would take advantage of the fact that they've got a 2/3 majority to use the plebiscite thing, which is perfectly legal. There's no, that's one thing that is a perfectly legal way that the Scottish Parliament has the powers to call a plebiscite. I have to admit that I don't know the entire way exactly they works and exactly what difference there is say legally between that and a referendum, but they certainly could gauge public opinion in a legal fashion with a 2/3 majority. And if they don't do it, as far as I'm concerned, that's the last time I'll vote for them. First vote SNP or not. And I think I agree with you. I think what I say to you is that's a job we've got to do, is to work that one out.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions?
Mark Cullen's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mark. For some reason, must be the display I've got. Oh. Can you unmute yourself, Mark?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening, and I'm thinking I'm of an age where I can remember the end of the 70s when the Labour Party had been in government for a long time and were tired. Thatcher came in. She made it to the middle. Well, she didn't, but the Tories made it to the middle of the 90s. And then they got tired and the Labour Party came in. It often doesn't do a party any harm to spend a bit of time in opposition because it refreshes them. It lets them see where they went wrong with the other parties. Now, the problem with the Scottish Parliament and the SNP is that there is no real opposition to come along and to take anything away from them. So I'm wondering, as I'm sitting through this conversation now this evening, thinking, is this the moment where the SNP are actually going to start to get some real opposition and really have to sort of buck up their ideas and maybe think about the potential that they could lose power in the Scottish Parliament or lose influence in the Scottish Parliament? And could this be the moment where we had, when Thatcher came in 79, when Tony Blair came in 97, when David Cameron came in 2010, could this be the moment that the Scottish Parliament needs to refresh it, if you like, you know? And obviously the SNP needs this moment to refresh and look towards what they're really meant to be for. I'm just thinking about that, listening to the conversation over the last sort of half an hour or so.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, as an official, as somebody who's watched politicians cavorting from the other side of the table, I would agree with you that all governments begin to lose their impetus. I mean, I think people don't realize just how demanding government is, and that it really is quite difficult when you are find one crisis after another dropping onto your desk to sort of sit there and start thinking out long-term policies. And I agree also with you that I think it's extremely bad for any party not to have an opposition. I mean, that doesn't mean to say that I accept the sort of idea that the job of an opposition is to oppose. I don't think it is. I think it's to come up with a viable alternative or shut up. But I mean, that's just me. But I think the trouble is in Scotland and within the situation we are in, that the sort of thing that you would say, you're saying now, that it would probably do them good to have a spell in opposition, would be true if the whole thing wasn't being affected by the question of independence, which means that your judgment about the fact that they're running out of ideas and will probably do quite good on opposition, it's affected by the fact that you've only got, it's that or the Conservatives, which puts people off quite considerably. And also that it would undoubtedly hold up the independence thing. And I think in Scotland, that screws the whole of the normal reaction.
Okay, is there anybody else? I'm just looking there. I don't see any other questions that have come in. Mark,
does Mark want to come back in again?
Yeah, just something slightly different. Again, this occurred to me and has been occurring to me over the last couple of weeks. You're looking at the issues that will be used to fight us or fight the independence campaign come the next referendum. One of the issues that I have noticed starting to get some traction now which didn't exist in 2014, is the issue of the border between Scotland and England. And we really have to have a good answer for that question, because I can see the border becoming what the currency was in 2014. And I can already see people talking about it, and I can see it being a more fearful factor for people who don't want independence than currency ever was in 2014. Would you care to comment on that, Dot?
I don't know. I think, for example, there's no two ways about it. We will have to have some kind of border if we go into if we do decide to continue and go into the EU. There's obviously going to have to be some kind of border. How we tackle it, the degree of difficulty that's attached to getting from one side to the other is, I think, going to be one of the things that's going to be a very serious part of the negotiations. I would think that, I would hope that what we would want would be that it would be as relaxed as one could make it. I have a feeling, knowing my own compatriots, that if Scotland were to become independent, I think a lot of Scots don't have any idea about how spiteful the English establishment is. And I think that they would rejoice in being petty. That is my opinion. But that, I think, is up to them. It'll be up to us to be grown up and not do it. I would hope that it would be as relaxed as possible. If one can have the kind of border that one has between the two sections of Ireland, I see no reason why we couldn't have that kind of atmosphere, really, about a border where you have restrictions, yes, you have alterations, but you can deal with them in an unbureaucratic way. I think that's feasible. Whether it will happen, I really don't know. I have worries about it too, and I think to go beyond the particular problem you asked, I think one of the things that we should be thinking about immediately are the things that are going to get thrown at us during the course of a referendum campaign. And it's one of the problems that I have about any kind of situation in which a Scottish government calls a referendum in a unilateral fashion. That's going to be something that would get thrown at us, and we've got to be clear that that's got that. So that's two things we've got to keep in mind. But we'll have to see. They're going to have to come out of their paddy sooner or later, after all. They're
also going to have to, I would say, come up with a different playbook, because the 2014 playbook has been widely debunked for a lot of reasons. So I think it'll be, I can imagine the establishment will be even more shrill and, and unstable in the sorts of things that they're going to be throwing at us. Yes, but the good thing is that what my experience on the stall tells me is that while the three issues, which were the major ones in 2014, the pensions, money, and the economy, as you say, all the things that were said at the time have been debunked completely. They were found out lying. Unfortunately for them, they remain. The last stall I did was before the pandemic, was last year, and year before last. And at that time, I have to tell you that the public, as far as the no people were concerned, they remained their concerns, so that at least that section of things they can't use because they've been caught out lying. They can't use the other one. They can't use is the EU because they were caught out lying. And as I say, to my mind, that behoves me to, it behoves us to think of things, because to my mind, if you want to win any battle, you shouldn't start thinking about
your own case, you should start thinking about the opposition. I think this is one of the things that Nicola's very bad about. She thinks that because she's got a plan, the other side haven't. Yeah. And I think you've got to, one of the most important things in winning any battle is to have looked very hard at the case that the opposition is going to take up and see how you can cut it from underneath their feet.
I've got another question here from the chat, from Hazel Lyon. Do we know any more MPs that are not hardcore Nicola Blackford fans, I suppose what means, who could be on the tipping edge?
Sorry,
a name for that.
I didn't catch that, love.
Do we know any more MPs that are not on hardcore Nicola Blackford fans who could be on the tipping edge? Not really needing names here.
No, I don't think I would want to comment on that.
I've heard it mentioned there might be 3 MPs, but I won't say who that came from, but it was a fairly good source, quite close to the top of Alba, sorry.
I think anyone's going to, it really depends what kind of MP they are. It really depends. It really depends what their priorities are, their personal priorities, whether it's their career. I have to say that I think that as long as Nicola remains leader, anybody who expresses severe, has issues with things that she wants to do, would want to think very carefully about whether they wanted to they felt about it strongly enough to sacrifice their position. How many people are prepared to do that? I don't know. We'll have to see. Usually with political parties, the thing that causes people to consider their loyalties and their priorities is if they see their party losing an election. That's a cynical official speaking, but I think that's true.
I think Teresa has, after you two.
Sorry, can I quickly say something, Doc? First of all, thank you for a great discussion tonight. And just a remark, 2/3 of the folk attending here tonight are women, which is fantastic to see, because usually in independent circles, sometimes it's balanced the other way, although I love all these great men. And I've been really impressed with the women's policies and everything, particularly the conference and the video. Now, is there any chance you could sponsor that video and get it out on Facebook tomorrow? Because it really resonates and there's a lot of women on Facebook.
I don't know, but I suppose I could email Tasmina and see what can be done.
It's just an idea. But we're running out.
Also in the chat, there have been lots of thanks for tonight and good wishes for Thursday, Dot.
Yeah, thank you, Dot. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You're always open and you give straight answers. And just to reiterate what Brian said, and I'm guest talking for everybody, all the very best on Thursday. And
yes, well, we really have something to celebrate if you see me as an MSP on Saturday night, I can tell you. But there you are. We'll just have to see about that. But it's always a pleasure. I mean, I think particularly at the moment when I must say I feel the frustration of fighting a campaign without being able to talk to people. I've been forced into a campaign where I have had to do all the things I do badly, like handling the technicalities of a computer, and not been able to do the things I do well, which is get out and talk to people and persuade them. And I found it very difficult. So it's a great pleasure to get amongst people and actually see faces and talk and discuss instead of just sitting there plowing the stuff out. So thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Right. I think we'll just draw that to a close then.
Thank you, Doc.
to everybody on Thursday.
Good luck, Dot.